Hi, everybody. This is Rick. As everyone prepares for another school year and I complete the first draft of the follow-up book to Evolution Talk, I wanted to make sure you knew this show is still alive and well. We've covered a lot over the last 93 episodes. Can't believe it's been 93 already. But there's still a lot more to learn about, especially when it comes to the constant excitement of new developments. So that's what we'll focus on in the coming months. New developments, research efforts, and a few eureka moments here and there as they apply to evolution by natural selection. Now, for those of you continuing your science studies this year in school or are simply here to learn, welcome back. If you've just discovered the show, I'm really glad you're here. Enjoy.
There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
Yeah, sorry, that's a little gross. It's the sound of a person eating celery. Now, I love celery, but I don't necessarily want to listen to the sound of somebody chewing it. Not up close, anyway. Nor gum, for that matter. When putting together this episode, I was originally going for the sound of gum being chewed to start it off. And listening to it even creeped me out, so I went with celery. But that's not why we're here today. Not to talk about that, not exactly. We are here to talk about mastication and a research paper that was recently published in Volume 8, Issue 33 of the journal Science Advances. And before we get to that, let's first explain what mastication is. You do it all the time. It's basically the act of chewing food. It's the cyclical act of opening and closing your jaws to use your teeth to grind food into smaller particles. It's something our ancestors learned, or better put, evolved to do over 260 million years ago. What makes us a little different than other animals is how we chew and how we use our mandibles. We don't simply open and close our jaws in a vertical motion. We also do so horizontally. The wonderful mechanics of our jaws evolved to allow for this. We have incisors to bite and molars to grind. Now, during the process, saliva is produced, which couples with the small particles created by chewing to create what's called a bolus. We swallow the bolus, which is almost like a little ball of chewed up food with saliva. I know, wonderful picture. But we send it off to be digested. The thing is, this all takes energy. Energy is expended by chewing. The more we chew, the more energy is expended. We also gain energy from the nutrients extracted from the food. So the question is, does one offset the other? It would be a cruel trick of nature if the cost of chewing were more than the gain. Now, this obviously isn't the case, or we wouldn't be here. Evolution by natural selection would have weeded us out a long time ago. But it's still a good question. How much energy do we expend when we chew? This is what the team of researchers whose results went into the paper sought to measure. The funny part is, no one had thought to do this before, to measure the metabolic cost of chewing. Now, it could lead us down a path to answer other questions, which we'll get to in a moment. This is where the gum comes in. Volunteers were brought in and placed in, well, think of a hood. Think of a dentist chair with a hood over their head. It wasn't an ordinary hood, of course. This one was able to measure oxygen input and carbon dioxide output. To measure their chewing activity, electrodes kept track of the movements of the volunteers' jaw muscles. First, they established a base for the volunteers. In this case, the base is the basal metabolic rate, or BMR. And when I say basal, it's BASAL. Your BMR is the number of calories burned while your body performs normal functions or actions. Think of your body at rest. That's where your BMR is established. Now, after establishing this, they then handed the volunteers 2 pieces of gum. One was soft and the other one was harder. Now, before I go any further, I first want to say, you're not going to be shocked by these findings. But again, it hasn't been measured before. Now, what do you think the researchers found when the volunteers chomped on the softer gum? If you guessed a rise in energy expenditure, well, you're right. On average, it increased by 10.2% above the BMR. When they chewed on the tougher gum, it increased to 15.1%, a full 5%, for chewing something only slightly harder. That's quite a bit of energy when you think about it. So again, no surprise, the more you chew or the more effort you put into chewing, the more energy is spent. But now comes the theorizing. How do we apply this knowledge to what we know or hope to understand? One thing is brain development. We as a species of modern humans have large brains. There are some very obvious benefits to having evolved a large brain. It's also exceptionally expensive when you consider the energy necessary to build it. The less energy spent doing things like chewing, the more that can be diverted to building a bigger brain over the course of a few million years. Natural selection stepped in to give us the jaws, the teeth, and the muscles needed to chew food efficiently. It all had to be optimized for the greatest benefit over time. Softer foods like, say, plants, expend less energy. Our ancient human ancestors also dealt with things like nuts and tubers from the ground. Those are much tougher and require more energy. And don't forget the time it takes to chew the food. It's not something you do when running from a predator. You want to be able to do it quickly and efficiently so you can move on. As natural selection optimized our chewing apparatus, any energy saved went to the development of larger brains to process information. We discovered how to shape our environment into tools. These helped as well. We could now cut food up. We no longer had to use our teeth and our jaws to tear it off. And then came fire. We talked about fire's role in the development of brains in a previous episode titled, Brains. The ability to master fire, which predates the appearance of modern man on the scene, meant our stomachs no longer had to do all of the heavy lifting. It's all broken down and nutrients are released before it even gets there. It also softens the sinewy, meat materials that were cut up before cooking. And this all equates to more energy saved. Now, the use of tools and fire and brain development is all theory and conjecture, but measuring the energy spent when chewing is another data point for science to consider. Softer foods equates to less energy. Tougher foods, considerably more energy. We now have the data to support what we knew, but we hadn't measured it. Breaking tougher foods down to make them softer and easier to digest by efficient chewing, tool use, and fire play a possible major role in human evolution. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Evolution Talk. I'm Rick Coast, and you can find show notes and source material used for this very episode at evolutiontalk.com. I hope your week is going well, and until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.